Christmas is supposed to be a season of warm, joyful gatherings. A chance for families to come together and celebrate the year. But that was not the case in the home of Lawrence Ollister. His second wife, his daughter's stepmother, had shattered that peace completely. She forced the little girl to do something so unthinkable that it would leave a scar no one could ever forget. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let this story unfold. I hope it serves as a strange sort of lullaby to help you drift off to sleep tonight. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. And now, let's begin. The church bells rang out, their echoes drifting through the snow-covered streets of Snow Creek. Every house was glowing, adorned with wreaths and twinkling lights on their porches. But one mansion stood out at the end of the road, the home of Lawrence Ollister. The brilliant light of thousands of Christmas bulbs reflected off the fresh snow, creating a magnificent, yet strangely cold spectacle. Inside, the household staff rushed about, setting the grand dining table. The clinking of silverware and the whisper of brooms, mixed with the faint scent of cinnamon and mulled wine. One of the maids spoke in a hushed tone. "Miss Miranda still hasn't come down." The other replied, her voice just as low. "She's still getting ready. She's been at it all afternoon." Up on the second floor, Miranda stood before a full-length mirror. She had tried on dress after dress, finally settling on a deep crimson gown with a neckline expertly cut to reveal her pale skin. She tilted her head, studying her reflection for a long moment before letting out a short, sharp breath. The mirror showed a beautiful woman, but her gaze was icy, completely devoid of warmth. She murmured to herself, "He wants a perfect party? Fine, I'll show him what perfect really means." Her phone buzzed on the vanity. It was Lawrence. "Lawrence, darling," she answered. "I just got out of the press conference. I might be a little later than planned. Don't wait for me." "You always are," Miranda said with a faint, dismissive smile. "You just focus on your work. I can handle everything here." Her voice sounded rushed. "Thank you, honey. I know I can count on you." She ended the call and stared at the dark screen. A cunning smile traced her lips. Downstairs, Ellie was curled up in a corner near the softly crackling fireplace. A worn sketchbook lay open on her lap, colored pencils scattered around her. She was drawing a pine tree in a field of white snow. There were no gifts, no lights, just a lonely, silent tree with bare branches. An elderly housekeeper walked by and smiled warmly. "Drawing again, Ellie?" "Yes, it's our little tree. But I think it looks a bit sad." "Yeah? Why sad, sweetheart?" "Because it's all alone." The woman sighed, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "You're just like your mom, you know. Quiet, but you see things the rest of us miss." Just as she finished speaking, Miranda descended the grand staircase. She caught the last words, and her eyes flashed with coldness. She glided over to the drawing table. Ellie looked up, her smile faltering as she met her stepmother's gaze. Miranda glanced at the drawing, her voice flat. "A Christmas tree with no lights and no gifts? Why would you draw something like that?" "I just think it's still beautiful, even without anything." "Beautiful." Miranda's lip curled. "You don't understand. Things are only beautiful when they are perfect." She turned away, the red fabric of her dress sweeping silently across the floor. Ellie watched her go, a shadow falling over her small face. But a short time later, Miranda was in the kitchen with the staff, inspecting every dish, every wine glass. Everything must be ready by 8 o'clock sharp. Lawrence detests tardiness. A maid nodded meekly. "Yes, ma'am." Miranda looked through the doorway and saw Ellie still drawing. "And keep that child out of my way. I don't want to see a single smudge on these floors tonight." After Miranda left the kitchen, Ellie tried to help by carrying a cup of hot tea up to her room. But her hands trembled, and the boiling water from the pitcher spilled over the side, splashing onto the table and the floor. Ellie gasped, clumsy with the cup. The steam scalded her small hand, turning it red and raw. The click of heels sounded behind her. "What is this?" Miranda's voice was sharp as broken glass. I spilled it. I said I'm so sorry. The elderly housekeeper rushed forward. The poor thing burned her hand. Let me get some cold water. Don't bother, snapped Miranda. Let her clean it up herself. She needs to learn to take responsibility. The housekeeper bowed her head, not daring to say another word. Ellie knelt to clean the floor, hot tears mixing with the spilled tea. Her small hand throbbed, red and blistered. Miranda turned and walked away, her heels striking the polished wood with a steady, relentless rhythm. Night fell, and the snow outside grew heavier. The phone rang. It was Lawrence. Hello, my baby girl. It's Daddy. Daddy, I'm drawing a little Christmas tree for you, Daddy. And I'm going to wrap your little present, too. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'll be home soon. Okay. I wish you were here now. Her voice trailed off as the call ended. Ellie rested her head against the cold window pane. From the hallway, Miranda watched it all. She stood with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Little thing. Keep going, little thing, she whispered to the empty air. Let's see who's left to save you this Christmas. A strong gust of wind blew through the trees outside, causing a string of lights on the porch to flicker and go out. A servant rushed toward the door. I'll go up and fix it, ma'am, before the boss gets home and sees it's dark. No, interrupted Miranda. Leave it. I don't want anyone ruining the atmosphere. She turned and began to climb the stairs, the sound of her heels echoing in the cavernous silence. Each step seemed to slow down, becoming heavier as she approached the small bedroom door at the end of the hall. Inside, Ellie was still sitting by the window, clutching her unfinished drawing. Candlelight cast flickering shadows on her face, making her eyes shine like pools of water. She heard the footsteps outside her door, and her heart began to beat faster. I'm sorry about the tea. I didn't mean to, she whispered, almost to herself. The doorknob turned. A soft click echoed in the room. Then silence. Only the sound of snow tapping gently against the glass. Miranda pushed the door open. Light from the hallway spilled in, casting a pale yellow streak across the floor. In her hand, she held a white porcelain cup. A thin trail of steam rose from it, carrying the sweet scent of tea. She stood there for a moment, looking directly at the child curled up by the window. Then her voice came, smooth and even, but colder than the winter air. Hello, it's late, Ellie. Drink some hot tea, and then go to sleep. Ellie looked up, hesitating. I'm not thirsty, ma'am. Your father told you to be a good girl, didn't he? Then do as you're told. She placed the cup on the small table, steam swirling in the space between them. Ellie looked at the cup, then back at the woman before her. In the dim light, the steam seemed to merge with the cold air, fading into nothingness. Miranda took a slow step forward, stopping directly behind the child. Careful now, she whispered, her voice a low hum. The water is still very hot. Ellie turned, her small hands instinctively reaching for the cup. The heat radiated against her skin, making her wince. Miranda's gaze remained fixed on her, sharp and terrifyingly still. The cup tipped and a stream of boiling water spilled onto the wooden floor, rising in a faint cloud of steam. Ellie recoiled, her small hands shaking, the rising heat flushing her cheeks. The rich scent of tea mixed with the faint smell of burning wood, making the air feel thick and suffocating. Miranda stared at the dark puddle on the floor, her eyes like slivers of ice. She set the pitcher, now empty, on the table. Her voice was quiet, but every word was loaded with menace. Hey, take this. Go to the kitchen. I want the water boiling at maximum heat. Ellie blinked, her heart pounding against her ribs, her feet frozen to the floor. She bent to pick up the pitcher, nodding slightly, her voice a fragile whisper in the wind. Yes, ma'am. She turned and walked, her small steps echoing down the silent hallway. The kettle was filled, and as it heated, steam curled around her wrists like invisible bindings. Ellie bit her lip to endure the stinging heat as her hands turned a vivid red. Miranda poured the water. Her breathing came in short gasps. Every exhale tasted of metal, scalding water, and pure fear. Miranda leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, her eyes never leaving the child. Miranda. Ellie, hurry up, she said without looking down, her tone as cold and hard as iron. Ellie nodded and filled a white porcelain cup. Her wrist trembled, and boiling water overflowed the rim. A few drops landed on the back of her hand, searing her skin. A small cry escaped her lips. Ouch, before she quickly stifled it. Terrified that the sound would displease Miranda, the woman approached. The loud click-clack of her heels marking a slow, deliberate rhythm of doom. Ellie, what's wrong? A little hot water and you're already crying? Ellie shook her head, her lips pressed tight, her eyes welling with tears. I'm fine, she managed to say, her voice so weak it was lost in her own breathing. Miranda leaned in, her hand hovering over the cup, feeling the intense heat radiating upward. Good, now bring it. Ellie held the cup, her small hands wrapped around the scalding porcelain. The water inside was still steaming, and the heat seeped through her fingers until they were numb. She took careful, measured steps, but as she reached the top of the stairs, her foot slipped on the runner rug. There was a soft thud, then a sharp, piercing sound. Crash. The cup shattered, and boiling water flooded the dark wooden floor, steam rising in a misty cloud. Ellie ... Ellie collapsed to her knees, her hands blistered and red, her lips trembling. I am so sorry. Miranda stood at the top of the stairs watching. Her eyes darkened. What have you done? Ellie turned her face away, tears falling into the steaming puddle. I didn't mean to. I tripped. Miranda descended, each step slow and full of fury. Do you have any idea how much that cup cost? Ellie kept her head down, sobbing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ... Miranda interrupted her, grabbing her by the shoulder and forcing her down. Sorry isn't enough. You made this mess. You are going to clean it. With your tongue. Lick it all up. Ellie froze, sure she had misheard. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. Ma'am, I don't understand. Miranda leaned closer, her voice a venomous hiss. I said, lick it up. You dirtied it, you clean it. Use that defiant little mouth of yours. I said. Then her hand tightened, sending a shooting pain through Ellie's shoulder. The child collapsed completely, her tears mixing with the hot water on the floor. I won't do it again. I'm sorry. It hurts ... 3. Miranda released her and stood up, her voice devoid of all emotion. I will count to 3. 1 ... Ellie stared at the steaming puddle, the light reflecting off the wet floorboards. 2 ... 3 ... The steam swirled in her face, stinging like 1,000 tiny needles. 3, 2. She got on her hands and knees. The heat from the floor burned her palms. She lowered her head, her lips trembling. The steam was suffocating, the smell of tea and burnt wood filling her senses. I'm so scared. Miranda watched from above with arms crossed, her voice dry. Good, now lick. Ellie closed her eyes and lowered her head. Her tongue touched the hot wood and recoiled, a sob trapped in her throat. My tongue is really hot ... The small sound was deafening in the suffocating silence. Miranda watched, a cruel, almost satisfied smile forming on her lips. Keep going until every last drop is gone. Ellie wiped her tears and tried to obey. Her knees slipped on the wet floor, her clothes soaking through, her breath coming in short, choked gasps. Every time her tongue touched the floor, a small pained whimper escaped, as faint as the sigh of a sick animal. The smell of hot tea and her own burnt skin made her want to vomit, but she didn't dare stop. Miranda sat in a nearby chair, tilting her head as she watched, her eyes following every movement. Hello, good girl. Remember this feeling. Next time, you'll be more careful. Meanwhile, downstairs, Lawrence was entertaining business partners. The clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter filled the living room. He spoke proudly of a new project, his eyes shining with ambition. But no one in that room knew that just above their heads, an 8-year-old girl was on her knees in a puddle of scalding water, crying and begging for mercy. Upstairs, Ellie's sobs grew louder. I can't take it anymore. My tongue is burning. Miranda replied with indifference. Deal with it. You'll learn. She pushed a piece of broken porcelain aside with the toe of her shoe, the sound of it scraping against the wood echoing faintly. Ellie tried to move forward, tears dripping from her chin onto the floor, mixing with the water. Then, suddenly, the sound of the front door opening echoed from below. A rush of cold air swept up the hallway, carrying with it the sound of a man's footsteps. Miranda shrank back, her head snapping toward the staircase. The footsteps were firm, powerful, and getting closer by the second. Ellie looked up, her vision blurred by tears, her breathing shallow and fast. Lawrence's voice boomed from the base of the stairs, deep and clear. Miranda? Where are you? Miranda jumped to her feet, backing away slightly, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way to hide the scene before her. Ellie remained on her knees, her small hands shaking, water dripping from her burned fingers. The sound of Lawrence's leather shoes on the stairs was slow and heavy, each step landing with undeniable weight. The wind from an open window fluttered the curtains. Miranda bit her lip, forcing a tight smile onto her face, but her expression was a rigid mask. The footsteps stopped right in front of the door. The knob turned, and the door creaked open. Hallway light flooded the scene, illuminating the wet floor where Ellie knelt, her tiny hands still resting in the now spread puddle of hot water. And there, framed in the doorway, Lawrence froze. His face slowly contorted in disbelief at the scene before him. Lawrence stood motionless in the doorway. The hall light cast a harsh glare on the wet floor, and the shivering little figure kneeling in a haze of steam. Ellie didn't look up. Her shoulders simply shook with silent sobs. Her lips were swollen and blistered, a bright, painful red. The faint scent of hot tea and burnt wood still hung in the air. Miranda stood nearby, her hands clenched into fists, her lips parted but completely silent. The room was plunged into a terrifying stillness. The wind howled through a crack in the window, a long, chilling wail against the glass. No one spoke. The only sound was Lawrence's ragged, heavy breathing. His gaze shifted from his daughter to Miranda. His voice was hoarse, every word landing with the weight of a stone. Miranda, what are you doing? Miranda shrank back, struggling to compose herself. She forced a laugh and took a step forward. You're misunderstanding, Lawrence. No. The girl spilled boiling water, and I was just telling her to clean it up. She gets so dramatic, you'd think Lawrence cut her off. He walked past her, his face a dark storm cloud. He knelt, taking off his heavy coat and wrapping it around his daughter's shoulders. Ellie, look at me. The little girl trembled violently, tears streaming down her face as her tiny hands clutched at his shirt. Daddy, she made me lick it. I was so scared. So scared. Lawrence went cold. Every word from his daughter was a fresh blade twisting in his gut. He looked at her lips, gently touching the raw, blistered skin. A white-hot rage overtook him. You did this to my daughter? He growled, snapping his head around to face Miranda. Miranda backed away, her eyes wide. You don't understand. She shrieked, her voice shrill. That girl pretends to be fragile to win your affection. She made a mess and then played the victim. You always believe her. You always make me out to be the villain. Lawrence stood up, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. His voice was a low, dangerous growl. I said, shut up. Don't say another word. Miranda insisted. You're blind. She doesn't deserve... I said, shut up. Lawrence roared, his voice so powerful it seemed to rattle the window panes. Miranda froze, her eyes blazing but her feet rooted to the floor. In her father's arms, Ellie let out a small, weak sob. Daddy, it hurts... Lawrence hugged her tighter, taking a long, steadying breath before gently wrapping his scarf around her, shielding her burned skin from the cold. His breathing was heavy, but every movement was filled with heartbreaking tenderness. Miranda took a step forward, her tone shifting to a desperate plea. "Lawrence, where are you going? Are you just going to leave me here? You can't just listen to her and turn your back on me like this." Lawrence looked at her, and the fury in his eyes had been replaced by deep, chilling contempt. "I'm not turning my back, Miranda. You are the one who burned everything to the ground. Wherever you go, hell follows." The words hung suspended in the air, freezing the room. Miranda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face went pale, her hands shaking at her sides. Lawrence said nothing more. He bent down and lifted his daughter into his arms. Ellie buried her face in his chest, her hands clinging to his neck. Lawrence turned and walked out of the room. The cold draft from the hallway billowed the curtains. He moved quickly, the sound of his dress shoes echoing on the floor. Each step was a declaration in a house that had only known the murmur of polite parties. Miranda stood stunned, watching him go. "You're crazy, Lawrence," she screamed at his back, her voice cracking. "You'll regret this. Do you hear me?" Lawrence paused at the top of the stairs but didn't turn around. He spoke softly, his voice like dying embers. "I've had enough regrets for a lifetime." Lawrence descended the stairs, his breath mixing with the sigh of the wind. Downstairs, the Christmas lights still twinkled, the red ornaments reflecting the image of a father cradling his daughter. The elderly housekeeper stood near the doorway, speechless. She could only whisper, "Sir... What happened?" Lawrence didn't answer. He just held Ellie tighter. The little girl pressed her cheek against his shoulder, her voice choked with tears. "I was scared. I thought you weren't coming home. I'm here now, my love. No one is ever going to hurt you again." The front door groaned as he unlatched it. A blast of freezing air rushed in, extinguishing some of the porch lights. Miranda came running down the stairs, her red dress trailing behind her, her hair in disarray. "You can't leave like this. We have guests. What about your reputation?" Lawrence turned, his gaze piercing through her. "My reputation is no longer in this house. It's in the hands of my daughter. And you have damaged it, Miranda." Miranda froze, her lips trembling, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. She shrieked, "You'll come back. You can't live without me." Lawrence shook his head gently. "You're wrong, Miranda. I once thought I needed you to have a family. But you don't build a home on fear." He opened the door. The wind howled, tearing at the decorative ribbons. The string of Christmas lights on the roof flickered and then went out for good. The housekeeper stared, her hands trembling. Miranda grabbed the doorframe, screaming into the storm with desperation. "Where are you going, Lawrence? You will regret this night." Lawrence didn't look back. He just hugged his daughter and stepped out into the snowstorm, his voice a deep murmur against the wind. "The only thing I know for sure is that tonight my daughter will sleep in peace." The snow fell in thick, heavy sheets. The wind whipped it into swirls that enveloped the father and child. Ellie buried her face in her father's chest, her small hands gripping his coat, her breathing rapid but less fearful now. Lawrence bowed his head against the wind and pushed through the deepening snow. Every step leaving a deep footprint, a trail leading away from the house stood inside. Miranda collapsed onto the floor, her eyes wide and empty as she stared at the white expanse. She let out a scream, but the wind swallowed it completely, leaving only the sound of the door banging against its frame. Outside, Lawrence paused at the gate, his breath turning into white mist. He adjusted the scarf over his daughter's shoulder and looked at her face, pale from the cold. Ellie opened her eyes and whispered weakly, "Daddy." "Where are we going?" "To find the light, my girl." The words escaped into the snowy darkness. He walked past the frost-laden pines, Ellie in his arms. The brightly lit mansion was slowly being erased by the falling snow, its faint light fading into the white curtain. A powerful gust of wind ripped the last string of Christmas lights from the roof. It fell to the ground with a soft snap and went dark forever. Lawrence bowed his head and crossed the gate, his figure disappearing into the Blizzard. All that remained was the sound of snow against glass, and the last glimmer of light from a street lamp, reflecting off the red scarf wrapped around the little girl in her father's arms. The wind howled through the pines, whipping the tails of Lawrence's long coat. He hunched over, shielding Ellie as he fought his way through the whiteness. The snow fell in a thick, blinding curtain, clinging to his hair and shoulders, melting into icy water that seeped through his clothes. But the cold was nothing compared to the agony strangling his heart. He walked with all his strength, his feet sinking deep into the snow, his breath exhaling in the freezing air. Every step away from that house felt weighted by a guilt he was only now beginning to comprehend. The guilt of his own blindness of a father, who had allowed his daughter to suffer in silence. His black car sat silent by the gate, already covered in a thick layer of snow. He yanked the door open, the cold air inside feeling like a slap in the face. After carefully placing Ellie in the back seat, he brushed the snowflakes from her face with a trembling hand. She was so pale. Her lips were cracked and swollen, her eyes half closed, her breathing as faint as a dying whisper. Lawrence slammed the door and jumped into the driver's seat. The engine groaned before roaring to life, the tires spinning on the slick ice. Outside, the snow was so dense that distant streetlights were just blurry smears of light. The radio turned on a cheerful choir singing Silent Night. The melody was soft, but inside Lawrence, everything was crumbling. He looked in the rearview mirror. Ellie was curled into a small ball, clutching the scarf he had wrapped around her. Her long eyelashes fluttered. He reached back and took her small hand. The one that had been red and raw from the hot water was now swollen and peeling. He squeezed it tightly, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, my girl. Daddy is here now. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." Ellie's eyes snapped open, her pupils dilated and unfocused in the dim light. She murmured a few words, her voice barely a breath. "Daddy, don't let her get mad at me. I'm scared." Lawrence felt his heart shrink. A wave of cold, crushing guilt washed over him. He realized his daughter had lived in fear for so long that even in agony, her first thought was of being scolded. A gust of wind shook the car. Lawrence wiped a tear from his eye and gripped the steering wheel. Ahead of him, the road was a blank canvas of white, old tire tracks almost buried. He accelerated, the headlights cutting a long, lonely path through the thick darkness. In the back, Ellie let out a soft moan. Lawrence checked the mirror again and saw her eyes were closed, her lips trembling. He fumbled with the controls, cranking the heat to the max, then grabbed a spare jacket and laid it over her. The tires squealed as he took a sharp turn. The headlights illuminated a green sign. Snow Creek General Hospital. 3 kilometers? Only 2 miles more, he told himself, trying to keep his hands steady. The snow fell harder, the streetlights casting a weak glow on his face, highlighting the deep lines around his eyes and his clenched jaw. In that moment, Lawrence was suffocated by memories. The nights he was away. The calls from Ellie he missed. The text messages she sent him that he glanced at and dismissed because he was too busy. And it all came crashing down on him, punctuated by a single question echoing in his mind. Where was I when she needed me most? The car sped over a small bridge, headlights flashing on a metal sign dusted with snow. Emergency entrance. Lawrence slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly before stopping in front of the hospital doors. He threw his door open, the cold wind hitting him like a physical blow. Without bothering to button his coat, he pulled Ellie from the back, her waning warmth seeping through the scarf. "Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. Help me," he roared as he burst through the main doors. "My daughter has been burned." His voice echoed down the sterile, brightly lit hallway. 2 nurses rushed toward him with a gurney. One helped him lay Ellie down while the other cleared the way, her voice quick and steady. "We've got her, sir. Please wait in the hall. Thank you. I'll do anything. Lawrence nodded sharply, his breathing ragged. The doors to the emergency room slammed shut, and a red light flashed above them. He staggered back until his back hit the wall. His hands were stained with soot and dry tea. He looked at them as if they belonged to a stranger. He collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, his whole body shaking from the cold and fear. He pulled out his wallet, and a small faded photograph fell to the floor. It was a picture of a young, smiling woman with long, kind hair, his late wife, Martha, and him with a 3-year-old Ellie on his shoulders. She was beaming, her cheeks round and rosy. Lawrence picked it up, and hot tears fell, smearing a corner of the photo. He whispered, his voice cracking. Martha. I promised you I would protect our little girl. And I failed. The sound of a nurse's shoes broke his grief. A young woman appeared, pulling down her mask. Her voice was soft but clear. She is stable for now, sir. We've treated the burns on her hands and mouth. She need to be monitored, but her life is not in danger. Lawrence exhaled, his body slumping with relief. He bowed his head, his voice choked. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. The nurse put a comforting hand on his shoulder. She's still very weak. You can see her now, but only for a moment. Lawrence walked slowly toward the door. The white light of the room spilled out, illuminating his gaunt face and the dark circles under his eyes. Ellie lay in the bed, her hands wrapped in white bandages, her breathing steady. He approached and sat beside her, gently taking her small hand in his. My girl, you are so brave. Daddy is here now. No one is going to hurt you ever again. Do you hear me? Ellie's eyes fluttered open, her lashes trembling. A single tear escaped and rolled down her temple. Daddy! She tried to speak, her voice as weak as a sigh. Daddy, please don't get mad. She screamed again. No, she won't, Lawrence said, his own tears now flowing freely. You don't have to be afraid of anyone anymore. I promise. He bowed his head, resting his forehead on her hand. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Outside the window, the snow kept falling, but the storm had begun to lose its fury. Lawrence sat like that for a long time until the wind whistling through the window frame changed its tune. He stood up, tucked his daughter in, and returned to the hallway. His emotions were a chaotic storm rage, regret, and a terror that hadn't yet subsided. The blizzard had not yet passed. Beyond the large glass windows, snowflakes swirled chaotically in the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Inside, the hospital was quiet, filled only with the steady beep of heart monitors and the soft footsteps of the night staff. Lawrence sat in the waiting room, his coat still damp, his hands gripped tightly between his knees. His eyes were fixed on the wall clock, its second hand dragging with agonizing slowness. He couldn't escape the images replaying in his mind. Ellie on her knees, her lips raw, the steam rising from the hot water. A faint sound came from behind him, the squeak of high heels on the damp tile floor. Lawrence looked up. Miranda was walking in, her white fur coat dusted with snow, her face pale but her expression as cold as ever. She stopped in front of him, her voice low but sharp. What do you think you're doing, Lawrence? The whole family is talking. The press will find out soon enough. Lawrence didn't move. He simply looked at her, his gaze terrifyingly calm. You tortured a child. There is nothing left to discuss. Miranda let out a humorless laugh, trying to maintain her composure. You're exaggerating. The girl got burned because she was clumsy. I was just teaching her a lesson in discipline. Lawrence remained silent for a few seconds. He rose from the chair and drew himself up to his full height. When he met her eyes, his gaze was so intense that Miranda took an involuntary step back. A lesson with boiling water? He asked slowly, every word heavy with contempt. A lesson that involved forcing her to lick the floor? Miranda's mouth opened, but no words came out. A muscle twitched in her jaw. You don't understand, she finally managed to say, her voice dropping. She always drove me crazy. She looks at me with your ex-wife's eyes. Every time she's silent, I can hear her laughing at me. Lawrence closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking slightly. When he opened them again, the look was different, deeper, more tired, and more painful than any rage. You're right. She looks like her mother. And maybe that's why I despise myself even more. His voice cracked. Because I allowed you near her. I let her live in fear in her own house. Miranda turned her face away, tears beginning to run down her cheeks, though they did nothing to soften the venom in her eyes. You'll regret this, Lawrence, she hissed. All the assets, the reputation, the company. Do you really think you can cut me out of your life? I won't let you. Lawrence looked at her for a long time, then let out a slow, weary sigh, as if releasing his last tie to her. There is only one thing I fear losing, and tonight, you almost made me lose her. He paused, his voice quieter but unwavering. My daughter. Miranda laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You can't put all the blame on me. You weren't there for her either when she needed you. The words shot out like a poisoned dart, sharp and precise. Lawrence froze. His hands clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Her words hit him exactly where it hurt most. The truth he had been avoiding for years. All the meetings, the business trips, the empty promises of I'll be home soon, they all shattered around him like 1,000 pieces of glass. He looked at Miranda but said nothing more. His anger had faded, replaced by exhaustion. In the dim light, their shadows stretched long on the floor, separated by a chasm that could never be crossed. The door to the hospital room opened slightly. A nurse poked her head out, her voice soft but clear. Mr. Hollister? She's awake. Lawrence didn't look at Miranda again. He walked away, each step slow and deliberate, leaving her behind with the echoing sound of her heels on the cold tile dot inside the room. The sterile white light made everything feel unnaturally still. Ellie lay in the bed, her hands bandaged, a thin strip of gauze over her mouth. When she saw her father, she sketched a small smile, a weak gesture that was warmer than anything Lawrence had ever seen. He walked to her side and sat down. Feeling better, my girl? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Daddy, Ellie nodded weakly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Daddy, this isn't a dream, is it? You're really here? It's real? It's real, he said, gently squeezing her hand. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. She looked at him, then slowly closed her eyes, tears finally rolling down her cheeks. Lawrence bowed his head and pressed his forehead against her hand, feeling the faint warmth that remained. He realized then how many moments he had missed. A hug, a shared dinner, a simple goodnight. Things that seemed so small but meant everything to a child. Outside in the hallway, Miranda leaned against the wall. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw Lawrence sitting with his head bowed over his daughter's bed. The light from the room reflected in her eyes, now dry, filled only with coldness and hate. A passing nurse asked gently, "Ma'am, would you like to go in?" Miranda just shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. After the nurse left, she looked through the crack one last time. Lawrence was still there, stroking his daughter's hair, his face filled with a strange kind of peace, a peace that made Miranda feel like she was suffocating. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking in short, sharp rhythms that mixed with the sound of sleet hitting the windows. But in Miranda's eyes, a small flame still burned. Not of love, but of a silent, smoldering hatred, like embers refusing to die. And as the hospital room door clicked softly shut, Lawrence continued holding his daughter's hand, his lips moving soundlessly, a silent vow of a father awakened in the darkness of a long, cold winter night. 3 days passed since that snow-covered night. Ellie's hospital room was filled with soft white light, so quiet you could hear the steady, rhythmic beat of the heart monitor. On the bedside table, a bouquet of lily had bloomed, their soft fragrance filling the air. Ellie was fully awake now, but her voice remained a raspy whisper. She grimaced every time she swallowed, her lips trembling with pain. The burns on her hands had begun to heal, but a deeper wound fear still lingered in her eyes. Lawrence barely left the hospital. He sat by his daughter day and night. Today, he learned how to mix her formula, how to hold a spoon steady enough to feed her oatmeal, how to adjust her blankets so she was perfectly warm. The hands that were used to signing contracts and trading stocks were now clumsy, like those of a man learning to be a father for the first time. His face was gaunt, stubble shading his jaw, and dark circles ringed his sleep-deprived eyes. But there was something new in his gaze, a patience and gentleness Ellie had never seen before. One night, while he was reading a fairy tale, Ellie gently pulled at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice fragile. "It was my fault." Lawrence stopped reading, the book sliding into his lap. He looked at his daughter for a long moment before resting his hand on her fine hair. "No, my love, never. The fault lies with the adults. With me. Not you." She closed her eyes, and a silent, transparent tear rolled down her cheek. Lawrence took her small, bandaged hand and gently stroked the healing skin. He whispered, his voice deep and raspy like the night wind. "From now on, I am here. No one will ever make you feel scared again. Do you hear me?" Ellie nodded gently. Her small shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in months, she fell asleep peacefully in her father's arms. The next morning, the doctor came for his rounds. He smiled after checking her chart. "She is recovering well, but she will need to avoid bright lights and salty foods for a few more weeks. Lots of rest." Lawrence nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. But when he stepped out into the hallway, he found the outside world was anything but peaceful. The long corridor was overrun with people, cameras, microphones, a cacophony of voices. A reporter was shouting his name. Camera flashes fired like a volley of gunshots. "Mr. Hollister, there are rumors that you are abusing your daughter. Is it true you brought her to the hospital to cover up a domestic issue?" "Lawrence, do you have any comment for the public?" Lawrence froze, saying nothing. The blinding flashes made him squint. A hospital security guard pushed through the crowd, clearing a path for him. He walked without a word. Back in the room, a nurse quietly placed the morning newspaper on the table. The front page showed a photo of Lawrence carrying Ellie through the snowstorm. The light caught his face, his eyes wide with panic and desperation. The headline screamed, "Millionaire Lawrence Hollister, the nightmare." Inside the Snow Creek mansion, Lawrence stared at the newspaper for a long time. He wasn't angry. He didn't react at all. And then he simply folded it, set it aside, and said quietly, "It's okay. It's better that people know. I've been silent for too long." From the bed, Ellie looked at her father, her voice weak. "Daddy, they're saying bad things about you." Lawrence shook his head gently. "It's okay, my girl. As long as they know the truth that I love you." That afternoon, as the last rays of sun filtered through the window, a motorcade pulled up to the hospital entrance. A car door opened and Miranda stepped out. She wore a white fur coat and dark sunglasses, flanked by a middle-aged man in an impeccable black suit, her personal lawyer. The reporters immediately surrounded them. "Mrs. Hollister, it has been alleged that you were the one who caused Ellie's injuries. Do you have a response?" Miranda took off her sunglasses and offered a thin, practiced smile. Her voice rang out clear and confident. "Those are just rumors. My husband, or rather Mr. Hollister, fabricated this story to defame me. I have proof, and I will let the courts decide." The crowd erupted into a frenzy. Several news outlets were broadcasting live. Within hours, a new headline dominated the news cycle. "Miranda Hollister fights back. Incident was a media stunt." Lawrence watched the news that night, his face turning pale, his hand tightening into a fist. Ellie, lying beside him, heard the report on the TV, her eyes wide with fear. Is she coming back?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lawrence turned and gently stroked her hair. "It's okay. It's okay, my love. I will protect you. This time for real." He spoke with conviction, but inside a storm was raging. He knew Miranda. That woman would never stop until she got what she wanted. And what she wanted now wasn't just her reputation, but to destroy every last trace of peace he had left. Night fell. The hospital corridors went quiet, filled only with the sound of wind rattling the windows. Lawrence sat by the window with a cup of cold coffee in his hand. The yellow light of a lamp cast long shadows on his face, accentuating his sunken, haunted eyes. Miranda's words from the other night echoed in his mind. You weren't there for her either when she needed you. The phrase was a blade twisting over and over again, keeping him awake. He thought to himself that if he could go back, he wouldn't let his work, his reputation, or any lavish party come between him and his daughter. But time doesn't turn back. All he could do now was use the time he had left to make things right. However late it was, the wind blew again, making the curtains sway. Lawrence turned to look at Ellie. She was asleep, her breathing even, her face calmer than it had been in years. He sketched a small, sad, but soft smile. Suddenly, he heard footsteps in the hall. Faint at first, then getting closer. The rhythmic clicking sound of high heels. Lawrence looked up at the door. The footsteps stopped right outside the room. The doorknob began to turn. A dim light from the hallway spilled onto the floor. The door opened slowly, and Miranda's silhouette appeared. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her face pale, but her eyes were as sharp and cold as ever. In her hand, she held a thick envelope sealed with red wax, the unmistakable seal of the court. Lawrence jumped to his feet, his eyes locked on hers. They stared at each other in silence. The morning was cold and sharp. Winter sunlight filtered through the hospital window, illuminating the wooden table where Lawrence sat. On its surface lay a thick manila envelope, its red wax seal marked and official. Summons to appear, defamation lawsuit, and division of assets. The light caught the cold, formal letters, making them look like a fresh wound. Lawrence broke the seal. The papers inside felt dry and brittle, smelling of fresh ink. He read every line slowly, his eyes darkening with every demanding word. Miranda Allister. He gripped the edge of the paper until it crumbled. The soft crinkle was the only sound in the quiet room. In the bed, Ellie was still asleep, her breathing even but shallow, her small hands still clutching his as if she feared letting go would make everything disappear. Lawrence leaned in and gently brushed the hair from her forehead. His whisper trembled. I won't let her touch you again. Do you hear me? Whatever the cost. The door opened quietly. Sarah Quinn, his personal attorney, walked in. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back neatly, her expression severe but kind. She set down her briefcase and took off her gloves, her voice calm and measured. I've reviewed the complaint, Lawrence. She is accusing you of slander, of deliberately plotting the story to ruin her reputation. And she is demanding control of all shared assets. Lawrence didn't look up. His voice was thick with emotion. I don't care about the assets, Sarah. I just want justice for my daughter. Sarah sat across from him and opened another file. I know, and we will file a counterclaim. If she wants to drag this into the light, then we let the light expose everything. I already spoke to the police. They are opening an investigation for child endangerment. But Lawrence, she has money, connections, and she knows how to play the media. You have to be prepared. Lawrence nodded slowly, his gaze as still as a frozen lake. I've been silent for too long. She always played the role of the perfect wife in public, and I let her manipulate everyone. No more. The news spread like wildfire. That afternoon, headlines burned across news sites. The high-stakes divorce of Snow Creek. Who is telling the truth? And Miranda Allister. I am the victim of my husband's vengeful plot. Social media erupted. Comments poured in. Some sympathized with Miranda, moved by the image of her crying on television in an elegant black dress, a single tear falling just as the camera zoomed in. She looks so heartbroken. If she's telling the truth, her husband is a monster. But others shared a grainy cell phone video of Lawrence rushing Ellie to the hospital in the blizzard. The caption trembling. This is the desperation of a father. Lawrence watched it all in silence. The blue light of the TV screen flickering on his face, etching deep lines of exhaustion. In the clip, he looked shattered, cradling his daughter as he ran through the snow. He turned off the screen and spoke softly, almost to himself. She's putting on a performance. But this time, I won't be a silent audience. The next day, 2 police officers came to the hospital to take a statement. An officer in a thick winter coat walked in, followed by a clerk. Lawrence sat next to Ellie, holding her hand tightly. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened that night?" The officer's voice was gentle but firm. "Yes." Ellie looked at her father, her eyes wet, her voice trembling. "She forced me to lick the hot water off the floor." The officer paused for a second, then nodded, writing her words slowly in his report. The scratching of his pen was a steady, resolute sound, the first pulse of justice stirring in the silence. Lawrence took a deep breath. He leaned in and kissed his daughter's forehead, whispering, "You were so brave, my girl." "It's almost over." That afternoon, the hospital was unusually quiet. The setting sun cast long shadows across the window, highlighting the court summons still on the table. The words "hearing," 2 weeks seemed to glow in the fading light. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to prepare for the biggest fight of his life. Outside, the wind picked up again. From the hallway, a reporter's voice drifted in. "We are live from Snow Creek General, where millionaire investor Lawrence Ollister faces grave accusations from his estranged wife." Lawrence closed the window, his expression hardening. He knew this battle wouldn't be fought only in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, where every word, every image could be manipulated. But this time he wasn't alone. Late that night, Sarah returned with a thick file. "I've obtained Ellie's medical report. The doctors confirm the burns are consistent with her testimony. And this," she slid a photo across the table. "This is security footage of Miranda leaving the mansion the night of the incident, right before you and Ellie arrived at the hospital. The timeline is a perfect match." Lawrence picked up the file, studying every photo. In one frame, Miranda was looking back at the house, her expression so cold it looked inhuman. He spoke softly, his voice rough. "Thank you, Sarah. The price of this truth will be high, but I am willing to pay it." And that night, the hospital was almost silent. Lawrence sat by his daughter's bed, watching as her small fingers began to move more freely. He smiled, but he knew in his heart that the deepest wounds weren't on her skin, but in her memory. "Ellie," he said quietly, "when all this is over, I'll take you far away from this city. We'll find a place where it's just the 2 of us, where we can finally have some peace." Ellie stirred in her sleep, the corners of her lips curling slightly as if she had heard him. Outside, the snow had stopped. The town of Snow Creek was still lit up, but in that small hospital room, time seemed to stand still. Lawrence looked at the table. The court summons lay waiting, the red seal gleaming under the lamp, a reminder that the real war had just begun. Lawrence stood up, put on his coat, and stepped out onto the small balcony. The cold air hit his face, waking him fully. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "Get ready, Sarah," he said, his voice low and decisive. "I'm going to court. And this time, I'm not going alone." On the other end of the line, Sarah's voice was calm but resolute. "I'll be there, Lawrence. And so will the truth." Lawrence looked out at the city. The night sky of Snow Creek was a pale, dark blue, the last patches of snow glowing under the moonlight. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "For my daughter. I will see it through to the end." In the darkness, the summons fluttered in the breeze. And its red seal hearing, 2 weeks shone like a warning flare, signaling the dawn of a battle for justice. 2 weeks passed in a blur. On the morning of the hearing, a thick, damp fog clung to Snow Creek, the chill seeping through the cobblestone streets. In front of the county courthouse, a long line of reporters crowded together, their cameras aimed at the main entrance. The air was filled with whispers and the incessant metallic clicking of camera shutters. A black car pulled up to the steps. Lawrence stepped out in a long, dark coat, his expression grim, but his eyes deep and resolved. He opened the back door and gently helped Ellie out. She wore a gray wool coat, her hands covered in thick gloves to hide the last traces of her burns, her small face framed by a white scarf. As the cameras flashed, Ellie tightened her grip on her father's hand. Lawrence leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, honey. Just look straight ahead. I'm right here with you." They moved through the crowd, escorted by police and their lawyer, Sarah Quinn. On the other side of the plaza, another car arrived. Miranda stepped out, the heels of her boots clicking sharply on the stone. She wore an impeccable white trench coat, her makeup perfect, her lips a deep red. When the reporters surrounded her, she tilted her head and offered a confident half-smile, the smile of someone who believes she still controls the game. Inside, the courtroom was packed. A silence took hold of the spectators as the judge entered and banged the gavel 3 times. The court is now in session for the case of Miranda Ollister versus Lawrence Ollister regarding claims of defamation and division of assets. We will begin now. The air in the room felt thick enough to cut. Lawrence sat at the defendant's table, still holding his daughter's hand. Across from him, Miranda sat with rigid posture. Her gaze like ice, flanked by her lawyer, a young man with slicked back hair whose voice was as smooth as a sharpened blade. "Your Honor," Miranda's lawyer began. "My client is the victim of a vengeful and calculated plot. There is no tangible evidence to prove she ever laid a hand on this child. These accusations are based purely on emotion and conjecture." Miranda lowered her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. She wiped the corner of her eye with a handkerchief, looking more like a betrayed wife than an accused criminal. The reporters in the back scribbled furiously. Sarah Quinn stood up, her voice calm but resonant in the room. "Your Honor, the defense wishes to call its first witness." The judge nodded. The courtroom doors opened. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed on the floor. A small woman with silver hair, dressed in a simple brown sweater, walked toward the stand. She inclined her head respectfully. "My name is Nora Salinas. I was the housekeeper at the Ollister home for 15 years. Lawrence looked up slowly. Ellie stared at the woman, her eyes wide with recognition. Across the room, Miranda froze. A flash of panic crossed her face before she masked it with a sneer of contempt. "Mrs. Salinas," Sarah said slowly, "please tell the court what you witnessed on the night in question." Nora clasped her hands in her lap and took a deep breath. "I saw it all. That night, Miss Miranda." Her voice trembled. "She made the child get on her knees. She said she had to take responsibility for spilling the water. And then, she forced her to lick the hot water off the floor." A wave of shocked silence swept through the room, broken only by the scratching of the court reporter's pen. The judge fixed Nora with a stern look. "Are you certain of this?" "I am. I wanted to call the police, but I was fired the next morning. I was afraid. But my conscience wouldn't let me stay silent anymore." Miranda jumped to her feet, her voice cracking. "She's lying. I fired her for theft. She's doing this for revenge." Her lawyer objected immediately. "This witness is not credible. She has a personal grudge against my client. Her testimony is baseless." Sarah remained unperturbed. She walked to the judge's bench and laid down a folder. "This is the medical report from Snow Creek General Hospital, confirming that the burns on Ellie Ollister's hands and mouth are perfectly consistent with the witness's testimony. Furthermore, we have security camera footage of Mrs. Ollister leaving the house exactly at the time this incident would have concluded." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge frowned, took the documents, and after a moment nodded. "Objection overruled. The witness may continue." Miranda sank back into her chair, her face losing color. Her fingers dug into the armrests, her knuckles turning white. Slowly, her expression shifted from disbelief to raw, naked fear. Lawrence said nothing, just looked at Nora with a mixture of gratitude and deep sadness. He squeezed Ellie's hand. She squeezed back, her wide eyes fixed on the witness stand, as if seeing a small ray of light in the darkness of her long ordeal. The court recessed for lunch, and Miranda stumbled out of the room, immediately surrounded by reporters. Microphones and cameras were shoved in her face. "Mrs. Hollister, is it true you forced your stepdaughter to lick boiling water? Do you have any evidence to refute the witness's testimony?" She tried to force a smile and dodge the lenses, but her eyes were wild and unfocused. A camera captured the moment she bit her lip, her smile cracking into a thin, fragile line. Across the hall, Lawrence was guiding Ellie, shielding her from the flashing lights. She pressed her face against his coat, her small hands gripping his jacket. As they passed, Miranda looked up at Lawrence for a single, charged second. Their eyes met, a silent exchange filled with years of animosity. Lawrence didn't stop, just said loud enough only for himself to hear, "The truth will defend itself, Miranda." Miranda watched them go, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. Once their figures disappeared down the hall, she slipped into a quiet alcove, her fingers trembling so much it took several attempts to dial the number. Someone answered on the other end. Miranda's voice was a hoarse, venomous whisper. "If I go down, you're going down with me. Don't forget that." She hung up, lifted her chin, and took a deep breath. The cold light from a nearby window illuminated her face, making her eyes shine like broken glass. The headline appeared in bold, damning letters on the front page. Miranda Hollister claims to possess evidence of financial misconduct by Lawrence Hollister. The words were a knife twisting in his gut. Lawrence sat in stunned silence, his eyes glued to the newspaper. The article was a tapestry of insinuations and anonymous sources. It has been alleged that Mr. Hollister hid millions of dollars during his time managing the family investment fund. He didn't need to read the rest to know who was pulling the strings. Miranda, still fighting, still trying to drag him down with her. Across the room, Sarah entered holding a stack of freshly printed documents. "She is trying to shift the narrative," she said, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. "The press is going to run with this. You have to be ready, Lawrence." He didn't answer immediately. He knew his past wasn't spotless. Years ago, with his company on the brink of collapse, he had signed some questionable contracts to save his employees and protect a charity fund. He had told himself it was just bending the rules temporarily. But now, that old crack in his armor had become Miranda's sharpest weapon. Ellie was sitting on her hospital bed, listening to a news report on the radio. The anchor's clear voice was like a needle in her ear. "People of Snow Creek are now questioning if Lawrence Hollister is truly the model father he appeared to be in court. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "Daddy, they're saying you're bad like her." Lawrence froze. He went to her bed, sat down, and gently pulled her into his arms. "I have made mistakes, my girl. But never, ever would I hurt anyone again. Especially not you." Ellie buried her face in his shoulder and nodded, her tears mixing silent and sad. Elsewhere, in a temporarily rented apartment, Miranda sat surrounded by a sea of scattered newspapers and files. The yellow lamplight illuminated her exhausted face, her makeup smeared. She held a glass of wine, her sunken eyes staring out the window at the reporters camped below. A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. "If I lose everything, he has to lose everything too," she muttered. Her voice raspy. She opened her laptop and clicked on a folder labeled Hollister Confidential. Inside were old contracts and bank statements she had secretly copied years ago. Then she sent the entire file to a local newspaper with a single note. "The truth needs to be exposed." But in her desperation, Miranda had forgotten that the file also contained documents she herself had forged to siphon money from the investment fund. Copied signatures, mismatched numbers, all the evidence that would become the noose around her own neck. That same afternoon, a retired bank teller named Alan Rosales walked into the police station. He stated that during the time Miranda was managing finances for the Hollister family charity, she had secretly withdrawn over $200,000 for personal administrative fees. An official investigation was reopened immediately, back at the hospital. While Lawrence spoke with Sarah, the phone rang. Sarah answered, listened for a moment, and then turned to him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Hello, Mr. Hollister. The police just confirmed that Miranda embezzled over $200,000 from the Children's Shelter Fund. They have the bank transfers." Lawrence was speechless for a few seconds. The world went silent. He looked slowly at the bed where Ellie was sleeping deeply, her face peaceful against the white pillow. "Justice is finally coming," he said softly, almost to himself. "My girl." We're almost out of the dark. That afternoon, weak sunlight filtered through the window. Ellie woke up and smiled. "Daddy." "I dreamt of Mommy. She said I have to be strong and not be afraid anymore." Lawrence smiled back, stroking her hair. "You are already strong, my little angel." But his smile faded as a doctor burst into the room, his face tense. "Mr. Hollister, she's spiked a fever." Lawrence jumped, pressing his hand against her forehead. Her skin was burning. "Oh my God, Ellie!" he cried. The heart monitor next to the bed began to beep rapidly. The numbers on the screen fluctuated wildly. Ellie's eyes snapped open, her breathing shallow, her lips turning pale. "Daddy, I'm so cold." Lawrence panicked, holding her with one hand while shouting for help. "Doctor, nurse, please hurry." The door flew open. 2 nurses and a resident doctor rushed in, pushing the bed toward the center of the room. A flurry of activity erupted. One nurse placed an oxygen mask over her face while another connected an 4-drip. The heart monitor let out a sharp, continuous alarm, the sound resonating like a war drum. Lawrence was pushed back, forced to watch his daughter surrounded by a frantic medical team, her body shaking uncontrollably. He wanted to move, but his feet were lead. The scene blurred through his tears. He could only hear the urgent orders of the doctor. "Bring the fever reducer. Increase the 4-drip. We can't let her temperature pass 104. Lawrence gripped the edge of a table, his knuckles white. Ellie stared at the flashing monitor as the line representing her heartbeat became erratic. Then it faltered for a terrifying second. "No, Ellie!" he screamed. A nurse hit a code red button, and the alarm intensified, a frantic, pulsing rhythm. The room descended into controlled chaos. Lawrence sank to his knees, his hands covering his head. In his despair, he could only hear one sound, his daughter's heartbeat on the monitor weakening, then dipping into the red zone. The medical team swirled around him, but for Lawrence the world had become a cold, white void filled only with the sound of his own desperate prayer. "My baby, please don't leave me." And there, under the blinding glare of the hospital lights, a new chapter of pain began to unfold. The night was a long vigil of prayer and fear. Without sleep, Lawrence sat motionless outside the ICU, his hands clasped, his eyes empty. The ticking of the clock was a cold, merciless rhythm. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the hospital steps under the weak yellow lights. Every snowflake melted on contact, just as the hope in his heart was slowly dissolving. "Good morning." When the doors finally swung open, a doctor emerged, his scrubs damp with sweat. He spoke in a hoarse but relieved voice. "She is out of danger. The fever was caused by traumatic shock. We've stabilized her heart. You can see her in half an hour." Lawrence froze for a moment, then collapsed back into his chair. His whole body shook as silent tears ran down his face. In that moment, he wasn't a powerful millionaire. He was just a father grateful that his daughter was still alive. 3 days later, at the final court session, the judge read the verdict before a room packed with reporters. Miranda Hollister is found guilty of child endangerment and embezzlement. The sentence is 8 years in prison. Miranda stood in the defendant's box, her face ashen. She looked around the room, her lips trembling. I just wanted to be loved," she whispered, her voice so weak it was almost lost in the murmurs of the crowd. Lawrence didn't answer. He just leaned down and kissed the top of his daughter's head. Ellie looked at him, her eyes as clear as the sky after a storm. "Daddy, can we go home now?" They walked out of the courthouse and into the light. The snow had stopped. Water dripped from the eaves, sparkling in the sun. The first rays of late winter sun bathed the father and daughter in a soft golden glow, making the whole city seem to soften. A month later, Lawrence sold the mansion and left Snow Creek behind. He and Ellie moved to a small log cabin by a lake. The house smelled of pine, the fireplace crackled cheerfully, and every morning began with the sound of birds skimming the water's surface. Ellie recovered completely. Her appetite returned, and her laughter once again filled their home. One morning, she brought her father a new drawing. Two figures standing under a snowy sky with a huge, radiant sun shining between them. Lawrence hung the drawing on the living room wall. He stared at it for a long time and said softly, "You know, you are the one who saved me, Ellie." That afternoon, she opened an old wooden chest. In the bottom drawer was a small box containing a fragment of the broken porcelain cup. She had kept it all this time, a reminder that her silence had once cost her daughter so much pain. Ellie approached, looked at the broken piece, and then looked at him. "Daddy," she said quietly, "can we throw it away? Let the wind take all the sad things far away." Lawrence looked at his daughter, his eyes warm. He nodded. They walked to the edge of the lake, its surface as still as a mirror reflecting the brightening winter sky. Ellie held the shard in her small hand and, with a gentle toss, sent it skipping over the water. It made a soft plink, and ripples spread outward, sunlight catching in the waves. Lawrence squeezed his daughter's hand and smiled. Ellie looked up, her eyes shining. "Daddy," she said, "my tongue doesn't feel hot anymore." Lawrence leaned down and pulled her into a hug. The two of them stood there together, their breath mixing with the crisp air as the last light of winter wrapped them in a soft, warm embrace. The snow was melting, and the lake shimmered like 1,000 tiny mirrors. And there, under that vast open sky, a new season had begun. One where old wounds could finally heal. And the sunrise for a father and his daughter had finally arrived. And that is our story for tonight. A journey through a terrible storm where pain was washed away by love and awakening. From the snow-covered, cold-hearted house, to the moment the last winter sun shone on a father and daughter holding hands. It is all a testament to the quiet magic of compassion and forgiveness. So, what about you? After hearing this story, what do you feel most? Who resonated with you? Was it Ellie, the child who overcame her fear to find her laugh again? Or was it Lawrence, the father who finally learned what it truly means to love? Or perhaps it was that final haunting moment of Miranda whispering, "I just wanted to be loved," that made you think of those who lose themselves in their own hearts. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me which character you connected with and whose actions moved you the most. I'd love to read what you have to share. Continue the conversation about this story. And who knows, maybe somewhere in that last winter sun, we can all find a little piece of ourselves too.